Hey there. If you've been sitting on the fence about using Claude for your photography business, or if you tried it once and gotten something too generic to be useful and you just moved on, then this episode is going to change that. I just did a live webinar called Getting Good at Claude for Photographers, and the response was enough to tell me that it needed to become an actual podcast episode. So here we are. Now, you're going to get the core of everything I taught, including why I moved from ChatGPT to Claude, what the cold start problem is, why it's the reason most photographers don't use AI tools for very long, and how to build the 5 reference files that give Claude permanent context about who you are and what your business does. One thing I want to be upfront about before we get into it, though. I've turned this content, the entire process, the prompts, the use cases, into a product, and it's for sale at generatorpodcast.com for $37. Now, the product includes a full-length video, the polished setup guide that walks you through everything step by step, and more importantly, it includes the 5 interview prompts I built specifically for photographers, one per file, ready to paste, so you can open Claude right now and build your files today without having to figure out what to ask. Those prompts are not in this episode. That's the one thing I'm holding back. You'll understand the concept completely by the time this is all over, and you'll know exactly what the prompts need to accomplish. So whether you want to write them yourself or just want the version that I already built for you, that's the decision that you get to make. Doesn't matter to me either way. The link to the product is in the show notes. Thanks again. Now let's get to it. Hey, I want to start by telling you how I got here because I think that matters. I started paying for ChatGPT back in May of 2023 when AI first started coming out as all the rage. I was curious the way that a lot of us were curious, and I figured that if I was going to spend time with the tools, I should actually invest in them and see what they could do for me. So I paid whatever it was, 10, 20 bucks at the time, and I used it and I learned how to ask better questions, and I found it genuinely useful for a lot of things. But over time, something kept nagging at me, and it wasn't really one big moment. There was no single conversation where ChatGPT said something so wrong or so ridiculous that I threw my hands up and just walked out. It was more like the slow realization that something just wasn't quite right and that I was spending way more time and energy managing the tool than I was getting value from it. And here's what I mean by that. I'd write something with ChatGPT and it would be fine. It would be technically correct. It would cover the points I wanted to cover, and it would be completely unusable because it didn't sound anything like me. It sounded like a press release from a company that had never met me. So I'd push back and I'd reprompt it and I'd say something like, that's too formal, try again, and it would try again. And then I'd say, it's still not right, and it would say, you know what? You're absolutely right. I apologize. Let me try a different approach. And then it would give me something that was slightly less formal, but still didn't sound like me. And the whole time it was agreeing with everything that I said, apologizing for everything that I asked it to change. And I kept thinking, I don't need you to agree with me. I need you to help me. So the quality, the constant agreement, the over-apologizing, the way that it would immediately abandon whatever it had just written the moment I pushed back on it, that's called sycophancy. And it's a real problem in AI tools, and it's not just an annoyance. A tool that's only ever tells you what you want to hear isn't a useful thinking partner. It's just a yes man. And I already know how to say yes to myself. I probably rationalize too many things. I've been using Claude in parallel because I heard that Claude wrote things better, but I wasn't paying for it. I was just using the free version when I wanted a second opinion on something. And what I noticed was that Claude was giving me better answers. Not different answers, better ones. It pushed back when my premise was off. And it would say, like, here's a concern with the approach you're describing, and here's why. And here's what I'd consider instead. Sometimes I'd disagree with it, and we'd go back and forth, and at the end of that back and forth, I'd have something I actually wanted to use. It also sounded more like a person, and that's important when you're interfacing with some of these tools. It's a strange thing to say about software, but if you've spent any time using any of these AI tools, you know exactly what I mean. There's a register that ChatGPT defaults to, and it's a kind of a polished, slightly corporate, slightly motivational tone. And no matter how many times you tell it to stop, it keeps drifting back there because that's its programming. Claude has a different quality to it. It's more direct. It's more willing to just say the thing. And when I asked it to write in my voice, it actually tried to write in my own voice rather than its default voice with my name attached to it. All right, so let's fast forward to October of last year, 2025. I stopped paying for ChatGPT and started paying for Claude. Not dramatically, it wasn't some drastic change. I just stopped renewing one and started the other because by that point I was already using Claude for almost everything and ChatGPT for almost nothing. I had also basically stopped using Gemini and Perplexity, which I had been dipping into for specific things like research, primarily. I just kept finding myself back in Claude, investing a lot more time there, getting better results, and at some point it stopped making sense for me to maintain paying for the others. And that's really the whole story. It's not some dramatic conversion. It's 2.5 years of paying attention to which tool is actually helping me do better work and making a practical decision based on what I saw. Now, I gotta be fair here because I think intellectual honesty matters more than making a clean case for the thing that I'm using. ChatGPT is a really good tool. If you've built real workflows in it, if you have custom GPTs that work for specific tasks, if your team is already using it, there's real cost to switching from one platform to another, and I'm not going to pretend that there aren't. It also has more integrations, it's got a larger community, and it's got more tutorials out in the world than Claude does right now. And quite honestly, when people ask about AI, they say ChatGPT, right? It's just what it is. All those things are true, but what I can tell you is that I found a way to be true for my specific situation. I'm a solo photographer running 2 different businesses, writing client-facing copy that has to sound like me. I'm making business decisions without a team to bounce it all off of. So for that work, Claude is the better tool. And that's the work that we're talking about here. So let me tell you a little bit about why, because it's worth understanding the philosophy behind the tools as well. And this isn't going to be technical, but I want to talk about it in a way that actually tells you something about what you're going to get from each one. Now, Anthropic, the company that built Claude, was founded specifically around AI safety research. A group of researchers, several who had already worked at OpenAI, left to build something with a different set of priorities. The core concern was, how do we build AI systems that behave consistently, that are honest rather than agreeable, and that try to be genuinely helpful rather than just appearing to be helpful? That design intent shows up in the product in ways you can actually feel. Claude is built to tell you when it thinks you're wrong. It's built to hold a position under pressure rather than immediately reversing when you push back. It's built to follow complex, layered instructions, and the kind of instructions that you'd give a real collaborator or an employee, rather than simplifying it into something just easier to execute. For a photographer trying to get copy written in a specific voice with specific constraints for a specific audience, those qualities matter a lot. OpenAI's priorities have been somewhat different. A broader capability, faster iteration, more integrations, more surface area. ChatGPT is a lot more flexible in some ways, but Claude is more consistent. And for the administrative work of running a photography business, consistency is what I actually need. Here's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about why this matters for photographers specifically. The administrative side of this business, the emails, the contracts, the client prep communications, the website copy, the marketing, all of it has to sound like you. It has to carry your voice. It has to carry your values, your relationship with your clients. If it sounds generic, it sounds like it was written by someone who never met you. It erodes the thing that makes your business worth choosing. People hire photographers for their vision and their presence, not just their technical skills. Anybody can press a button. And the copy that represents you before a client ever walks through your door is part of that presence. A tool that drifts back to generic, that can't hold your voice over a long working session, that agrees with you instead of helping you, that tool is going to work against you in this specific context. And that's the context that we're in. So when I tell you to use Claude and not ChatGPT, that's the reason. Not because one is smarter or more advanced in some abstract sense. No one can keep up with that race. But because for this work, Claude holds. And that's what I needed. All right, let's talk about why most people don't get that far and what they're missing when they don't. I want to tell you about the most common way that people fail with AI tools, because I did it too. And I see it constantly when I talk to other photographers who've tried this and walked away really underwhelmed. So here's how it usually goes. Someone hears enough buzz about ChatGPT or Claude or whatever tools getting talked about in their corner of the internet that they finally decide to try it. They open it up, they type something, maybe they ask it to write a client email or a draft of some copy for their About Me page, and they get something back that's almost right. It's close enough to be interesting, but not quite good enough to actually use. It's missing that voice. It's a little generic. It uses words they would never use. It sounds like a brochure from a company that they've never heard of. So they try again. They say, make it sound more casual. And it gets a little bit more casual, but it's still not right. They push back a few more times. They get something they don't hate. And then they decide the whole thing is more trouble than it's worth. And they quietly go back to writing their own emails and wasting time. Does it sound familiar? Thought so. So here's what I want you to understand about that experience. The tool didn't fail. The setup failed. And there's a real difference between those two things, because one of them is fixable with about 2 hours of work that you only ever have to do once. Think about it this way. Let's say you hired a copywriter, an actual human being, someone who does this for a living. Maybe it's a real copywriter, maybe it's a VA. You bring them in, you sit them down and you say, write me an email for a new inquiry that comes in. And you hand them a blank piece of paper and walk out of the room. What do? They have no idea who you are. They don't know what your business sounds like. They don't know what you stand for. They don't know what kind of clients you work with, what your prices are, what you care about, or what words you would never put your name on. So they write something competent and generic, because competent and generic is all they can produce without a briefing. Now, imagine you sat down with that same copywriter for an hour first. You told them everything about your story. You showed them examples of your best writing. You explained who your clients are and what they're actually looking for when they come to you, what makes you different. You gave them the words that you love to use and the phrases that you hate. You walked them through how your business works and what a good client experience feels like. Same writer, completely different output. Now, that briefing is what most people skip when they're using AI tools. And I understand why, because nobody tells you it's the missing step. The marketing around all of the AI tools is all about capability, about what they can do, and very little about what they need from you before they can do it well. So people show up, they type a request into a big blank box, they get something generic and conclude that the tool, that it's not that useful. What they've actually concluded is that a copywriter with no briefing doesn't sound like them. Yeah, that's true. And it's not particularly useful information. The good news is that building the briefing is a one-time investment. You do it once, you load it into Claude, and from that point forward, every session starts with Claude already knowing who you are, how you write, what your business does, and what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. The cold start problem goes away. You stop spending 10 minutes at the beginning of every single conversation re-explaining yourself, and you start getting output that's actually worth editing on the first draft. That is a huge time saver. That briefing that I'm talking about, that lives in a set of files. And building those files is exactly what we're going to go over in this video. I'm going to give you enough detail that you can do it yourself this week. But first, let me show you what those files actually are, what each one does, and how Claude uses them once they're in place. Because understanding the why behind each file is what makes the difference between building something useful and building something that sits in a folder and never gets opened up again. I want to start with a word that might sound technical, but it isn't. And I promise you that by the time I'm done explaining it, you'll wonder why anyone ever made it sound complicated. That word is Markdown. A Markdown file is just a plain text document. That's it. There's no special software. There's no design skills. There's no coding knowledge that you need to know. You can write a Markdown file in the Notes app on your phone right now if you wanted to. The only difference between a Markdown file and any other text document out there is that it uses a few simple symbols to create light formatting, like a pound sign at the start of a line makes it a header. An asterisk on either side of a word makes it bold. A hyphen at the start of a line makes it a bullet point. That's the whole system. If you've ever formatted anything in Slack or Notion or sent a text with an asterisk around a word for emphasis, you already get the concept. The reason we use this format for the files we're talking about here isn't because it's technically superior to anything else. It's because Claude reads it cleanly and reliably. Plain text with some light structure is really easy for any AI tool to go through, which means Claude spends its attention understanding your content rather than trying to figure out what the formatting is doing. And since these files are the foundation of everything Claude's going to help you with, you want them to land clearly. All right, so you've got a plain text file. Now, what goes in it? This is where we get to the actual work. So I use 5 files. Each one does a really specific job, and together they give Claude a complete picture of who you are, how your business works, and what good output looks like for you. So let me walk you through each one. The first is the aboutme.md. This is your story. Who you are, where you came from, what you do, why you do it. It's your background before photography, if that's relevant. What your current focus is right now. And I mean right now, not 6 months ago. How you actually communicate, your confidence, your posture, the way you think, the way you reason. This file answers the question that Claude is really asking at the start of every single session. Who am I working with? The more specific and honest your answer is, the more useful everything that follows becomes. A 2-paragraph about me produces really generic output. But a well-built about me produces something you might actually send. So the second file is the brand voice. This is how you write. Not how you think you write, how you actually write when you're at your best. This is the file that most people underestimate. They throw a few adjectives in it like warm or professional or approachable and wonder why the copy still doesn't sound like them. It sounds like everybody else. Warm and professional describes about 40,000 photography businesses. Claude needs more than that. What makes a voice file actually work is specificity. Real phrases that you use, the rhythm of your sentences, the words you'd never put your name on, and I mean specific words, a list of them, not just nothing too corporate. Examples of writing that you're proud of, even a sentence or two that Claude can use as an anchor is going to help. The more precise your constraints, the less Claude has to guess, and we don't want it to guess. And the less it guesses, the more it sounds like you. All right, so the third file is the working style. Now, this one is about how you want Claude to behave, not what you want it to produce. Do you want it to push back when your logic is off or just execute? Do you want short, punchy responses or thorough ones? How should it handle it when you correct something, like you want it to fix it quietly and move on or explain its reasoning? What formatting do you like? Most people skip this file entirely and then spend half of every session managing Claude's behavior instead of doing the work. Build it once and you don't have to manage it again. The fourth file is the company MD. This is your business. This is your services, your pricing, your structure, your tools, your platforms, all of your key relationships, all of it. The reason that this file matters is that Claude can only write accurate client-facing content if it knows what you actually offer and what you actually charge. Think about what happens without it. You ask Claude to draft a response to a pricing inquiry, and it asks you something vague, and it gives you answers because it doesn't really know your prices. You want it to help you write a website page for a specific package, and instead it invents language for a package that it doesn't understand. You ask it to help build an email sequence for new leads, and it writes something that doesn't match the experience that you're actually delivering. The company file is what makes all of that specific rather than generic. Now, the fifth file is the goals markdown file, and this is one that most people would never think to build, so I wanted to spend a moment on why it matters. When you ask Claude for strategic advice about pricing or about a new offering that you have or about how to approach things in a slow season, the quality of that advice depends entirely on whether Claude understands your financial context. So there's a real difference between advice calibrated for someone who's comfortable and building and advice calibrated for someone who needs revenue like yesterday. Those are two completely different situations, and they produce two completely different recommendations. If Claude doesn't know which situation you're in, it defaults to the comfortable, theoretical version, which may or may not have anything to do with your actual life. So the goals file tells Claude where you are financially and what you're trying to accomplish in the next 30 to 60 days, what the medium range picture looks like, and what a great year actually means to you. Not your dream version of a great year, your real version. Now, the more honest you are in this file, the more grounded the advice you get back. Honesty is everything in the goals. Now let me show you how all of these files get into Claude in the first place and what happens once they're there. There are three distinct layers of memory in Claude, and they work together rather than fighting against each other. The first layer is within session memory. Inside a single conversation, Claude remembers everything. Every message, every correction, every piece of context that you've added. It can connect something you said 20 messages back to what you're working on right now. And this layer works perfectly and requires nothing from you. The second layer is projects. Now, a project is a persistent workspace inside Claude where your files live permanently. You create a project, you upload your 5 files once, and every conversation you start inside of that project already has your full context loaded before you type your first word. There's no re-uploading, no re-explaining. Claude already knows who you are when the session opens. Now, this is the setup that makes Claude feel like a real business tool rather than something you'd have to retrain every time you open it. For a solo photographer running multiple parts of a business, projects are not optional. They are the whole point. I didn't used to use projects, and then once I started to organize things into projects for my website or for my CRM or for personal communications, everything really started to come together. The third layer of memory is user preferences. Now, these are the system-level settings that apply across everything, every conversation, every project, regardless of what you're working on. Think of them as like your global defaults. These are your name, your baseline tone preference, any hard rules that apply everywhere without exception. Things that should never change no matter what you're asking Claude to help with. But a good way to think about how these three layers all stack together is user preferences are always on in the background. Projects give Claude the full briefing for a specific area of your work, and the within session memory holds the thread of the conversations that you're actually in. Each layer builds on the one before it. Now, before we move on, I want to give you a little look at something called co-work. You may have heard of this, but Here's a really high-level overview. I'm not going to go deep into it because I don't think it's the right starting point for most people. The foundation we've been talking about comes first. I want you to know that it exists and understand where it fits, but it's really not the focus of this. So Cowork is part of the desktop application that lets Claude see what you're working on in real time. Not in a browser tab that you switch to, even though there is a browser version of Claude that can see what you're doing on Chrome, for example. But Cowork sits right beside you, watching your screen with your permission, interacting with the actual document or email or CRM window that's open in front of you. The practical implication of that is that it's significant. Instead of describing what you're looking at and then asking Claude to help you with it, Claude can see it directly. The context is already there. You just have to tell it what you need. It's kind of in this early stage, and it's going to get significantly better over the next year or two, which is why I'm not leaning too heavily into it right now. The other part is that it burns a lot of tokens in Cowork, so it might drive your usage and expenses higher for using Claude if you hit your limits because you're asking it to do too much. But the reason that I mention it now isn't that you shouldn't go use it or try it out. It's that once you've built your files and you've loaded them into a project and gotten comfortable with how Claude works, this is where it goes next. The photographers who are getting fluent with the foundation of all of this are the ones who are going to hit the ground running when this kind of tool matures. And that's really all I'm going to say about it. So let's get back to the work that's in front of us. So you've got 5 files to build. Claude knows what they are. The question now is how you actually build them, and specifically how you build them this week rather than someday. That's what we're going to cover next. Everything we've covered so far has been building to this. You understand why Claude is the right tool. You understand why most people fail with it. You understand what the 5 files are and what each one does. Now we're going to actually build them. And I want to give you 2 ways to do this because not everyone is starting from the same place. If you've been using ChatGPT for any amount of time, you have raw material sitting in that account right now that's going to save you a significant amount of work. If you've never used AI tools before, or if your ChatGPT history isn't really relevant to your photography business, then there's a different path that works just as well. It just starts from a different place. So let's start with the export, because even if you end up on the fresh start path, I want you to understand what's possible here. If you've been using ChatGPT to work through business questions, draft emails, think through client situations, or write anything related to your photography business, that conversation history is a record of how you think, what you work on, and what your business looks like from the inside. So ChatGPT stores all of it, and you can download it. Here's how. First, you're going to open ChatGPT and click your profile icon in the bottom left corner of the screen. Then click on Settings, and then inside Settings, look for the section called Data Controls. Click on that. Now, you're going to see an option that says Export Data. Click that big button that says Export. Then ChatGPT is going to ask you to confirm, and then it's going to send you a download link to the email address in your account. You got to check your email because the download only lasts for about 24 hours, so you don't want to waste time here. Once you get the file, unzip it. Inside, you're going to find a file called conversations.json, conversations.json. This is the one you need. Now, I want to be honest about what you're going to find in there. It's going to be a lot of information, years of conversations potentially, including plenty that have nothing to do with your photography business. You don't need all of it. What you're looking for are the conversations where you're working through something real, like a pricing question, a difficult client situation, a business decision, a piece of copy you were trying to get right. Those conversations are gold because they show Claude not just what your business looks like, but how you reason about it. You don't have to sort through all of it manually. That's exactly what Claude's going to do for you. So here's how Path A works. You're going to open a new Claude session and upload the conversations file from ChatGPT. You can just drag and drop it directly into the chat. Then give Claude a prompt that asks it to read through your history and generate a first draft of each of the 5 files, one at a time. And you want to note anywhere it finds gaps that you'll need to fill in yourself. So tell it to wait for your feedback before moving from one file to the next. That's the structure. Claude reads your history, pulls out what's relevant, and gives you a draft to react to rather than a blank page to fill. The prompt for this is in the setup guide at generatorpodcast.com. It's specific enough that getting it right matters, which is exactly why I put it in the product rather than trying to rattle it off here. But you now understand the structure of what it needs to do, and that's the important part. I want to be clear about what a first draft means in this context. It means a starting point, not a finished product. You're going to read what Claude produces, correct anything that's wrong or missing, add the specifics it couldn't find, and sharpen the language till it actually sounds like you. That editing pass is not optional. It's a non-negotiable. It usually takes about an hour, maybe 2 for all 5 files, but editing a draft is fundamentally different from building from nothing. And for most people, it's the difference between actually finishing the files and then just putting it off indefinitely. In the other case, if you're starting from zero, the process is different, but the outcome is exactly the same. Instead of handing Claude your history and asking it to extract the information, you're going to let Claude interview you, one file at a time. Claude asks you questions, you answer them, and at the end of each interview, Claude builds the file from your answers. Now, this works well for a specific reason. Most people, if you ask them to write their own about page or describe their own voice, they just freeze up. They either go too broad or they get lost in the weeds. But ask those same people to just answer a question, and they do it naturally. The interview format turns a blank page into a conversation. So this is one interview prompt for each of the 5 files. You paste the prompt into a new Claude session. Claude asks you one question at a time. You answer honestly, and when it has enough, it builds the file and shows it to you for review. The prompts are very specific. About Me covers your background, your current focus, how you actually communicate with people. The brand voice file goes deep on your tone, the words you'd never put your name on, the rhythm of how you like your sentences to flow. The working style file tells Claude how to behave with you, how to handle it when you're wrong, whether you want bullets or prose, how to manage long sessions. The company file covers your services, your pricing, your policies, your tools, everything that goes into your business. And the goals file, the one most photographers never think to build, that gives Claude your actual financial context, so the strategic advice that it gives you is calibrated to where you actually are, not some theoretical, comfortable business owner. All 5 of those interview prompts are in the setup guide, again, at generatorpodcast.com. So whether you use a path A or path B, a few things will make the difference between a file that's genuinely useful and one that's just okay. You gotta answer honestly. There's a strong pull towards the aspirational version of every answer, the things that you wish would happen, the version of your business you're building toward rather than the one you're actually running right now. And Claude needs to know where you are, not where you're headed. You can always update these files as things change, so go specific whenever you can. When Claude asks you about your tone and you're tempted to say warm and professional, well, push yourself further. Warm like what? Professional in what context? Who do you sound like at your best? The more specific your answers are, the more specific the file becomes. And specificity is the whole ball game here. So when you get a draft, push back on it. When Claude shows you the finished file, read it carefully and correct anything that's off. If a section feels really generic, tell Claude what's missing and ask it to try again. These files are only as good as the editing pass you put them through. Do them in order. The files build on each other. Do the About Me first because everything else references it. Brand voice second because it shapes the tone of the working style guidance. Working style That comes third, and then company is fourth, and then the goals last. That sequence makes each subsequent file better. Now, once your files are built, here's how you load them in. You go to Claude, and in the left sidebar, you're going to see a section called Projects. Click New Project. Give it a name, like your studio name or photography business, whatever makes sense to you. Inside the project, look for the section where you can add files or context and upload all 5 markdown files there. It's going to be on the right side. That's your setup. From that point forward, every conversation you start inside that project opens with Claude already, knowing everything in the files. You don't re-upload them. You don't re-explain yourself. You just start the conversation and do the work. For your user preferences, click your profile icon and go back into settings. Inside, you're going to find a section for custom instructions or user preferences. This is where you put the things that should apply everywhere across every project and every conversation. Things like your name, your baseline tone instructions, any absolute rules that have no exceptions. That's the complete setup. It's a couple hours of work and you only have to do it once, and Claude stops being a tool that you manage and starts being a tool that actually knows you. One thing before we move on to the use cases. The photographers who get the most out of Claude are not the ones who are best at prompting. They're the ones who invested in their files. A well-built set of files with a simple prompt produces better output than a brilliantly crafted prompt with no files behind it. The setup is the skill. Everything else is just asking Claude to do the work. Now, everything we've talked about so far has been the setup, the files, the projects, the memory layers. All of that exists so that when you actually sit down to do the work goes faster and comes back better. Now, that's the payoff. 5 things you can do with a properly set up Claude that used to eat your time and your energy. I'm going to walk you through each one and tell you exactly what a well-constructed prompt for that situation needs to accomplish. The actual prompts, the ones that I've already written and tested, are in the setup guide at generatorpodcast.com. Again, I'll keep pushing you over to the product, but understanding what the prompt needs to do is the real education here, because once you know that, you can build your own version of this or just use mine. Either way is fine. Here's the first use case, email. Now, email is the highest frequency administrative task most photographers deal with. The same 5 situations come up over and over. There's a new inquiry, a pricing question, maybe there's a ghost who stopped responding, a difficult client, a follow-up after a session, stuff like that. Now, you write fresh variations of these same conversations on a daily, if not weekly basis, and it takes longer than it should every single time. With your files loaded, Claude already knows your voice, your pricing, your policies, and your relationship with your clients. You give it the situation, and it gives you a draft that sounds like you wrote it on a good day. The prompts for this need to do 3 things. They need to paste in the actual message you received, so Claude has the real context to work with. They need to give Claude the emotional tone that you're going for, because there's a real difference between a warm response that moves someone towards a call and a professional response that holds your position after a difficult delivery. And they need to tell Claude how long to go, because a 300-word inquiry response is a different product than a 100-word one. The specific prompts for a new inquiry and a post-delivery pushback situation are in the guide. The structure that I just described is what you need to write on your own if you'd rather start there. The second use case is marketing. Now, most photographers don't have a marketing plan. They have a vague intention to post more consistently, and they have this running guilt about the fact that they haven't done it. That's not really a plan. Claude can help you build an actual plan. Not a generic content calendar template that you downloaded from someone's blog, but a specific plan built around your business, your current capacity, your upcoming seasons, and what you're actually trying to accomplish in the next 90 days. A good prompt for this needs to tell Claude your primary goal for the period, your honest available time for marketing work, and which platforms you're actually on. The reason the available time piece matters is that Claude defaults to ambitious if you don't constrain it. Tell it you have 3 hours a week and it builds a 3-hour-a-week plan. Leave that out, and you're going to get something that looks good on paper, but falls apart by week 2. Here's the third use case. I use this for campaign ideation. Now, this one is about using Claude as a thinking partner before you commit to anything. You have an idea for a seasonal offer. Maybe it's a mini session event, a collaboration, a new package, and you want to stress test it before you put time or money into it. Now, most photographers either commit too quickly because they're excited, or they sit on ideas too long because they don't have anyone to think them out loud with. Claude is great at both problems. The key thing about a prompt for this situation is what you're asking Claude to do. You're not asking for a recommendation, you're asking it to surface the questions that you should be answering, the problems that you might not be seeing, and what would make the idea significantly stronger. That framing changes the output completely. If you don't include it, Claude is often just going to tell you whether or not it thinks the idea is good, which is the least useful thing that it can possibly do here. Here's the fourth use case, making Claude your thinking partner. This is the one that most people don't expect to find useful, and then they end up using it more than anything else. You make a lot of decisions alone. Pricing changes, new directions, difficult client situations, business pivots, slow seasons that make you question everything in life. There's no partner to call, no team to bounce things off of, and asking friends or family, business advice usually produces well-meaning responses, but they miss the point entirely. Claude, with your files loaded, knows your business well enough to actually be in the conversation with you. And 3 situations come up for photographers more than any others. Pricing decisions, which is like whether to raise rates, how to structure a new package, whether to add or drop a service. Then there's slow seasons, when bookings are lower than expected and the spiral starts and you need someone to help you figure out whether this is a real problem or a normal pattern. And the deeper question that comes up more than most photographers want to admit, which is questioning whether a direction, a type of work, or an entire part of the business is still right. A good prompt for any of those situations has one thing in common. You're not asking Claude for an answer. You're asking it to help you think. You want the questions you should be answering, not a recommendation. That keeps you in the driver's seat of your own business while giving you something most solo operators genuinely never have, which is a thinking partner who knows the details well enough to be useful. Here's one of my favorites. This is the 5th use case. This is probably the least obvious, but it might be one that you use the most once you understand it. Every CRM has its own logic, its own terminology, its own workflow structure, its own way of doing things. And when you're trying to build something inside it, an automation, an email sequence, a pipeline, you end up spending half your time in the help documentation trying to understand how the tool actually works before you can go build anything. So here's the workaround. Now, I use 17 hats and this worked perfectly for me. Go to your CRM's help center and find the documentation for the feature that you're trying to build. Copy it or grab the link to it and paste it into Claude along with your request. Now, Claude isn't guessing at how your CRM behaves. It's reading the same documentation that you would read and applying it to your specific business situation. You get guidance that's actually relevant to the tool you're using, not generic CRM advice that may or may not translate to your tool. The prompt structure for this is straightforward. You name your CRM, you paste the relevant documentation, you describe what you're trying to build, and you ask Claude to walk you through it step by step in the context of that specific tool. That's it. So those are the 5 use cases: email, marketing plans, campaign ideas, Claude as a thinking partner, and fixing your CRM with context. Here's what they all have in common. None of them are magic. None of them produce finished work that goes straight out the door without you touching it. What they do is they get you a usable draft in the fraction of the time that it would take you to start from zero. And for a solo photographer like me running a business by yourself, those little fractions add up to real hours every single week. If you want the actual paste-ready prompts for all 5 of these, plus the 5 interview prompts for building your own files, plus the written setup guide, plus the video. All of that is at generatorpodcast.com. And like I said, it's $37. The link is down there in the show notes. You can write your own version of every prompt based on what I've described here, and you'll get there. Or you can just use the ones that I already built. Either way, the work I just walked you through is the thing that makes any of it go. The setup makes all of it possible. The files are the reason the prompts work. Without them, you're going to get something competent, but really generic. With them, you get something that sounds like you thought of it yourself, because in the ways that matter, you did. Good luck. Let me know how it works for you. And if you have any questions, just send me a note. Thanks for watching the whole video. Now go make your files, do them in order, like I said, be honest, and have a great time using Claude.